Hello, I'm a whole lot of Glenn, aka Hellwater Fire. This is Hell War News for the 31st of January 2016. 6016 if you're a Royal Arch Freemason named Vladimir Putin. Let's get down to business. Alright. What does the Royal Arch Freemason Vladimir Putin have to do with Her Majesty's Secret Service? Let's get down to business on Hell War News. The young British intelligence recruits entered this building had no idea of the hell that lay before them, no idea that they would be forced to become slaves to a demonic mind control program run by MI6 and sanctioned by the Royal Arch Freemasons. No idea that they would be forced to sign the Masonic Sapphire contract and swear allegiance to the monarchy rather than the UK state that they lived in. No idea at all. In fact, the Power Gen building was mostly unoccupied in 1979. Ah, yes, Power Gen. I remember that. Um, the Power Gen building, uh, only a few Power Gen employees worked in the building, which was almost deserted. The car park was nearly empty for the whole of that year. The third floor was reserved for special government projects, and no Power Gen employee was allowed entry. The outsiders, the young people who entered this building each day, looked like a relatively normal young bunch of Power Gen graduate recruiters, and so nothing out of the unusual was noticed. At 21 years old, Richard Thompson, pictured here, was one of the graduate intakes onto this course. Most of the recruits were between 18 and 21 years old. Tomlinson was to begin his training here to become an MI6 officer later on his military career. Others were being trained to be run as agents of the crown, like Vladimir Putin, seen here under the Royal Arch Mason insignia. Yes, it was at the Power Gen in 1979 that Richard Thompson was first shown a passport and photograph of Vladimir Putin. Remington, Manahan, Bueller, and Scarlett showed the graduate trainees, each Delta espionage and assassination team members, a selection of four passport photos. The recruits were informed that the four KGB men in the photos were their counterparts in the KGB, so that would be their partners who are in the KGB. The recruits were all under the impression that these young Russian KGB agents were supposed to be the enemy or rivals, despite Manningham Bueller's communist training. During her Russian political history classes, pictured here Eliza Manningham Bueller, Nazi. Ah, yes. Uh, what was the real communism according to Manningham Bueller? It began with the guardianship by those who were born to rule. They were the self-elected custodians of British society. Ah, notice how it says British society. The troublemakers of all, the Templar sons of bitches, who could decide what their people's best interests were. To summarize, a benevolent dictatorship. This was personified by Manahan Bueller demanding that each of her classes stand to attention and do a Nazi salute, just like the Queen of England did in that fucking old film I showed you people in her little Malta home as she walked in the door before she would begin the lesson. Ah, yes. Important note, passport photographs had been supplied by one of Oleg Gordievsky's contacts. Gordievsky was a Royal Arch Freemason and one of Russia's chapter Freemasons. He had negotiated photographs of the new Royal Arch Freemason recruits within the KGB to be sent to MI5, proving that it is one giant happy family. In 1980, Russian monastery compound Aaron Karim, Jerusalem, Vladimir Putin and the other KGB Royal Arch Freemasons stayed within this high security compound. It was run by a nunnery, still is today, but is generally known as the Russian Orthodox Church to be a spy center and is currently being run by an ex-FSB head. The British intelligence recruits mainly stayed in the youth hostel behind St. John's Church in the center of Erin Cairn. It is located partly up the mountain which overshadows the town, and it backs onto a pine forest. Even today there are still guard dog signs, barbed wire everywhere around this building, and locals say that it is not possible to book as an ordinary tourist. It was reserved for special groups of young people internationally in 1979 and has been for many years. Recently, the whole building was changed hands and is now being renovated into flats in order to be sold off. How times have changed. Now, if you notice in this paragraph, that they used the building for special groups of young people, international in 1979. Now, this describes pretty much exactly what is going on in the DRE program and the Occupy movement, where they get the Occupy kids and get them all high under a controlled DRE mind control program. And whatever happens after that, well, we've seen the proof of that. They get sent back out to the Occupy movements to stir up shit. Typical mind control program. Besides the main building of the youth hostel, there are two hexagon buildings architecturally built rather like geometric mushrooms. This is where the British graduate trainees were lodged: Richard Tomlinson, Andrew Marr, and Stephen Daldry. In the evening, the graduates would sit in the veranda of these buildings with their KGB Russian counterparts to smoke, drink vodka, and shoot the breeze. None of them could hold a conversation in Russian apart from Tomlinson, who did his best to act as interpreter for the whole group. Together they looked like ingeniuses trying to desperately live up to their programming as illuminists, their predecessors, the colonists of the enlightened period, who had ruled the world by their supposed innate superiority and worldliness. Yes, the Freemason fucks. This was to be the very first meeting of many Richard Tomlinson and Vladimir Putin would have. The later was quite a few years in his senior at 26, 27 years old, but much younger looking. 1993 in Poland, Vladimir Putin lost his job as KGB controller of the Stasi in eastern Berlin. There was a famine in St. Petersburg, and the KGB owed their employees several months of salary. Whole families were starving in the city's foods, nothing upheld at the ports, and Vladimir Putin's own family was no exception to this rule. John Scarlett, MI6 Moscow station, made a deal with Mr. Putin in Poland. They knew each other relatively well, dating back to '79 in Karim, Jerusalem. That's what we just talked about, and both were Royal Arch Freemasons. Poland had become a trading ground for potential Russian dissidents to sell whatever they could to lay their hands on to the West. Almost every intelligence agency had descended upon Poland to buy whatever they needed, and the amount of wheeling and dealing, double dealing, which was going on had reached fever pitch and was almost laughable. No one knew who was working for who, which agency was aligned to who, in what turned out to be a smash and grab bun fight. One could name MI5, MI6, and CIA and IRA as a few, but in this free-for-all, the desperate dash to acquire information, drugs, guns, you name it, just about every intelligence agency and mafia organization was in on the game. Everything was for sale. What was the deal that Scarlett struck with Putin? Putin needed a safe passage for him and his family out of the situation in St. Petersburg, which of course hit dire need proportions, which was rapidly deteriorating. Scarlett had agreed to set up a new identity for him at the UK as a teacher of the German. Putin had a native speaker fluency in German in exchange for, well, this is a bit unclear. Scarlett already had all the information that was needed from Putin on the Royal Arch Freemasonry network. However, he agreed to take Mr. Putin and his eldest daughter back to the UK and rescue his wife and younger daughter at a later date. Of course, the bells went off in Putin's head. Scarlett was to renege on the deal. He bullshitted Putin MI5 for reasons of their own and decided to torture and then murder Mr. Putin as soon as he set foot on British soil because he was dispendable. They had almost all the information they needed from him and were not going to honor any deal. The upshot out of it all was that when Putin learnt the British intelligence real agenda, he called the deal off and returned home to Russia. So far, so simple, except for that there was one complicating factor: Royal Arch Freemasonry. Putin had been part of the Russian chapter, and he had been sorely let down by his British counterparts. In addition, he had been under MI6, Royal Arch Freemason Illuminati mind control since 1979 and had been one of their operatives within the KGB until 1994. Why 1994? Because that's when the double cross happened. This is the year when MI6 Illuminati laptops began to disappear in Europe. Mr. Putin was beginning to work it all out, and as a consequence, was tracking down the MI6 senior officers who held the color-coded information and the tailored mind control programs for their officers and agents within their laptops. Electric locks that were supposed to be unlockable but were in fact quite easy to crack by the KGB. Once the codes were broken, it is relatively simple to control any of the operatives listed, as well as guess how to control others who were indoctrined in a similar way, and when to turn them against their masters. Yes. For details of the typewriter code at the old British prison in Jerusalem, it accounts for 10 different branches of Royal Arch Freemasonry infiltrated British intelligence departments since 1945. The KGB Royal Arch Freemasons were one of these departments in this tarantula-like Masonic organization which had been strangling the world since the last days of the British Empire. Again, proving the Freemason fucks are behind it all. Within those British intelligence who were not Royal Arch Freemasons had no idea of what was going on at all. If they did manage to catch a Russian spy within the mist, it was because the Royal Arch Freemasons had deemed this person expendable and had fed him or her to the fishes. Think Burgess, McLean, etc., and you will get the picture. Blunt escaped such censorship hounding. He was a master of Royal Arch Freemasonry. One of the most sinister departments of Royal Arch Freemasonry British intelligence is the ZKTZ, to be found on the list of codes on the British typewriters in Jerusalem British prison museums. This prison was run by the British, who had forced Jews and Arabs to man their Palestinian police stations. Yes, the Royal Genome Project in brief. Vladimir Putin had been chosen as a DNA sperm donor within the Royal Project and had then been ordered by the Masonic body to copulate with various British female agents in Berlin. The zygotes were then collected, and the young women involved were subsequently murdered. Yes, and they would make snuff films out of it all. He also boasted that listening to them bug the room being murdered during this period. Cameras were also placed in TV sets for Royal Arch Freemasons to view afterwards. In essence, snuff movies. So there you go. This continues on and on and on and on and on. I only have a 15-minute limit. You want to read this article. It also goes into how the tsunami in Malaysia was planned and a bomb detonated under the tectonic plates to cause the tsunami in Malaysia. It goes into all that kind of stuff, proving indeed that Vladimir Putin indeed works for MI6, KGB, and the Royal Arch Freemasons. Hell War News. I'm out of here.